And here we go again with another day of watching the universe's most paradoxical species try not to die, Taz'Lur muttered, adjusting his ocular enhancers as he peered through the observation window. The Helios Nexus space station, pride of the Galactic Medical Alliance and home to the most prestigious Interspecies Medical Academy this side of the Andromeda Galaxy, was abuzz with the usual morning chaos. Students from 17 different planetary systems rushed through the curved corridors, their varied anatomies creating what looked like a living abstract painting in motion. Taz'Lur, or Taz as his classmates called him, because apparently 4 syllables was 3 too many for some species, flicked his sensory tendrils in mild irritation. As a Valerian, his species' natural immune system could fight off practically anything short of a supernova radiation burst, which made his assignment to the Human Observation Research Initiative particularly amusing. "Have you seen the new human exchange student yet?" Kirata asked, her bioluminescent skin pulsing with excitement as she sidled up next to him. The Lumidian's glow brightened whenever she got worked up about something, which was approximately every 7 minutes. "No, but I've read the briefing," Taz replied, gathering his research tablets. "Another fragile specimen requiring constant environmental adjustments to avoid spontaneous organ failure, I presume?" Vox, a Centauri with multifaceted eyes that allowed him to see in 6 different directions simultaneously, clicked his mandibles in what passed for laughter among his kind. "You should have heard Professor Navarox this morning, going on and on about how we need to maintain strict contamination protocols and remember that humans are walking petri dishes of bacterial colonization." "Charming," Taz responded dryly. "Remind me again why we're studying a species that can be killed by microscopic organisms they can't even see?" "Because," came a voice from behind them, "despite our apparent fragility, we've managed to spread across 3 solar systems without accidentally sneezing ourselves into extinction." Taz whirled around to find himself face to face with a human. Average height for their kind, dark curly hair, and the usual excessive number of exposed mucous membranes that made humans walking infection risks. "Morgan Reeves," the human said, extending one of its upper limbs in what Taz recognized as their traditional greeting ritual. "Exchange student from Earth Medical Central. And yes, I've been fully decontaminated before boarding, so you can put away those sanitizer sprays you're all clutching." Blythe, a 4th member of their research team, had indeed been nervously fingering a bottle of universal sanitizer. The Erosian's gaseous form condensed slightly in embarrassment. "We weren't," Taz began, but Morgan cut him off with a sound he would later learn was called a snort. "Sure you weren't. Look, I get it. You all think humans are basically fragile sacks of microbes held together by hope and caffeine. But I promise I won't contaminate your precious space station." Professor Navarox floated into the laboratory, his gelatinous form rippling with academic authority. "Ah, I see you've all met our new team member. Morgan here will be joining your Xenobiology research group for the remainder of the term." Professor Taz began, trying to sound as diplomatic as possible. "Are you certain it's wise to have a human working directly with specimens, given their susceptibility to infection?" The professor's central core darkened in what Taz had come to recognize as amusement. "That's precisely why Morgan is here, Taz'Lur. Your research team will be documenting human immunological responses as part of your comparative xenobiology thesis." Morgan smiled, revealing those disturbing white calcium structures humans used for food processing. "In other words, I'm not just a member of the team. I'm also your research subject." Taz felt his primary heart sink. Perfect. A full semester babysitting a creature whose immune system was so pathetic it could be overwhelmed by particles too small to be visible. "Just try not to die on us," Taz said, attempting what humans called humor. Morgan's smile widened. "No promises. But if I do, you'll have excellent research data for your thesis." Taz's secondary heart joined the first in sinking. This was going to be a very long semester. Day 4 of human observation, Taz dictated into his research log. "Subject continues to engage in excessive cleanliness behaviors at frequencies that border on neurotic. He paused the recording as he watched Morgan through the dormitory monitoring system. The human had just spent nearly 15 minutes standing under a stream of heated water, a process Morgan called showering, and was now vigorously moving a small, bristled instrument across those calcium-based mouth bones. Resume a log, Taz continued. Subject is now conducting the daily oral cavity sterilization ritual, using a manual scrubbing device and some form of foaming chemical agent. This marks the second such cleaning today. Hypothesis: human mouth environments are particularly hospitable to lethal microorganisms. Vox leaned over Taz's shoulder, his compound eyes reflecting the monitor's glow. Fascinating, isn't it? They're absolutely terrified of their own bacterial flora. Can you blame them? Kirata chimed in, her skin pulsing a thoughtful blue-green. My xenobiology professor at Lumidian Academy said humans evolved on a planet so overrun with pathogens that they're basically walking biohazards. Did you know they host over 10,000 different microbial species in and on their bodies at all times? Plythe's gaseous form quivered. How do they not just die? Constantly. That's what we're trying to find out, Taz replied, glancing back at the monitor where Morgan was now applying some kind of scented chemical to their underarms. According to the medical archives, humans spend approximately 2.5 hours each standard day just fighting off microbial invasion through various cleansing rituals. The observation continued as Morgan left their quarters and headed toward the communal dining facility. The research team followed at what they considered a safe distance. Look, Vox whispered, mandibles clicking excitedly. It's about to consume nutrients. This should be informative. They watched as Morgan approached the food dispensary, then before even selecting any sustenance, pumped a clear gel onto their hands from a wall-mounted dispenser and rubbed them together vigorously. Hand sterilization ritual before eating, Taz noted in his log. Presumably to prevent contamination of food with external microbes. Actually, came Morgan's voice from just a few meters away, causing all four aliens to startle noticeably. It's to prevent contamination of my food with whatever I might have touched since the last time I washed my hands. Taz felt his primary heart rate accelerate in embarrassment. You heard us? You're not exactly subtle, Morgan said, grabbing a tray. And Vox's mandible clicking carries across the whole cafeteria. Vox's exoskeleton flushed a mortified purple. Since you're all so interested in my sterilization rituals, why don't you join me? I can explain what I'm doing while you take notes or whatever. The research team exchanged nervous glances before cautiously approaching Morgan's table. So Morgan began, unwrapping a food packet. You all think humans are obsessed with cleanliness because we're terrified of infection, right? The evidence suggests as much, Taz replied carefully. Your species dedicates significant daily time to various antibacterial procedures. Morgan laughed. We're not so much terrified as respectful of microbes' ability to make our lives miserable. Think of it like preventative maintenance. But the frequency? Kirata interjected, her skin now pulsing with academic curiosity. 3 oral cavity cleanings per day, multiple full-body water immersions, constant hand sterilization. Try living with a few billion microorganisms that are actively trying to colonize your body and see if you don't develop a few cleanliness habits, Morgan replied, taking a bite of their food. Plythe's gaseous form condensed anxiously. But aren't you concerned about ingesting the microbes on that food right now? Morgan shrugged. Some bacteria are actually beneficial. We need them for digestion. This statement caused such confusion among the research team that Taz nearly dropped his data tablet. You deliberately cultivate microorganisms inside your digestive tract? Taz asked incredulously. Yep, we call it gut flora. Couldn't digest properly without them. But that contradicts everything we've observed about your cleanliness behaviors. Vox exclaimed, mandibles clicking in agitation. Morgan smiled cryptically. Humans are full of contradictions. Over the next few weeks, the research team meticulously documented every aspect of Morgan's hygiene regimen. They recorded the precise temperature of shower water. Apparently it needed to be hot enough to cause minor epidermal discomfort, the exact movements of the tooth-cleaning ritual, and the various chemicals applied to different body parts throughout the day. It's becoming clear, Taz noted in his private research log after nearly a month of observation, that humans exist in a constant state of microbial warfare. Their bodies are battlegrounds, and these cleaning rituals are their defensive maneuvers. The team gathered in their laboratory to discuss their findings, bringing together weeks of observational data. The pattern is undeniable, Taz began, displaying their collected data on the holoscreen. Humans have evolved on a planet so hostile, so teeming with microscopic threats, that they've developed these complex behavioral patterns just to survive day-to-day existence. It's actually quite sad, Kurata added, her skin pulsing a sympathetic lavender. Imagine living your entire life in fear of organisms you can't even see. The psychological toll must be enormous, Plythe agreed, his gaseous form swirling contemplatively. Vox clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. Perhaps this explains their remarkably short lifespans. The constant stress of potential infection must wear them down rapidly. I've developed a new theory, Taz announced, feeling the excitement of scientific discovery. Humans aren't just fighting infection, their entire civilization is built around this constant microbiological war. Their cleanliness rituals aren't just medical necessities, they're cultural cornerstones. That actually makes sense, Kurata mused. Their obsession with cleanliness isn't pathological, it's an evolutionary adaptation. As the team continued their enthusiastic discussion, none of them noticed Morgan standing in the doorway, arms crossed, listening to their theories with growing amusement. Poor fragile humans, Taz concluded with what he thought was compassionate understanding. Their entire existence is centered around not succumbing to invisible invaders. What a tremendously fearful way to live. The day that shattered Taz's understanding of human physiology began like any other on the Helios Nexus. The Xenobiology lab hummed with the usual symphony of equipment, centrifuges whirring, sample analyzers beeping, and Plythe's occasional gaseous sighs as the Erosians struggled with pipette calibrations. "Pass me that culture medium, would you?" Morgan asked, gesturing to a sealed glass container on Taz's side of the workbench. Taz carefully lifted the container, his tendrils instinctively curling away from the human bacteria samples inside. He'd spent enough time around Morgan to know the human wasn't actively contagious, but old prejudices died hard. "Here," he said, sliding it across the workbench. "Though I still don't understand why you insist on handling these cultures yourself. The automated systems are designed specifically to minimize cross-contamination risks." Morgan rolled their eyes, a distinctly human gesture that never failed to unnerve Taz. But because, as I've told you approximately 47 times, some procedures require a hands-on approach too. The sound of shattering glass interrupted whatever explanation Morgan had been about to give. For a moment, the lab fell into stunned silence as all eyes turned toward the source of the noise. Morgan stood frozen, their hand extended over the workbench where the culture container now lay in jagged pieces. A thin line of red liquid human blood, Taz realized with horror, was already beading along Morgan's palm. "Containment breach." Vox shrieked, his mandibles flaring in alarm. "Human biological fluid exposure." Kurata's skin flashed a panicked crimson. "Emergency protocols. We need to get Morgan to the medical bay immediately. Activating biohazard containment field." Plythe's gaseous form swirled frantically as he rushed toward the emergency controls. "Stop." Morgan's voice cut through the chaos. "Everyone just calm down." Calm down? Taz couldn't believe what he was hearing. "You've just exposed an open wound to multiple bacterial cultures. Your immune system can't possibly." "It's fine," Morgan said with a casualness that seemed borderline suicidal to Taz. "Just get me the first aid kit." The first, but you need emergency medical intervention. Prophylactic antibiotics. Possibly a limb isolation chamber. Morgan sighed. The first aid kit. The small white box with the red cross on it. In the cabinet by the door. Still in shock, Taz retrieved the requested item while Kirada hovered anxiously beside Morgan, her luminescence fluctuating between concern and confusion. "Thank you," Morgan said, taking the kit and flipping it open with their uninjured hand. "Now, watch and learn something about human medicine." Morgan extracted a small bottle labeled isopropyl alcohol, 70%, and, without hesitation, unscrewed the cap. "What are you?" Taz began. Before he could finish his question, Morgan poured the clear liquid directly onto the open wound. Great cosmic nebulas. Vox screamed, multiple compound eyes widening in horror. "Are you insane?" Taz shouted, lunging forward as if to knock the bottle away, but freezing when he saw Morgan's grimace. The human's face contorted in what was unmistakably pain, yet they continued deliberately pouring the liquid over the wound. "You're burning yourself," Kirada whispered, her skin paling to a horrified white. "Why are you burning your own flesh?" Even Blythe, who normally maintained a scientific detachment, had condensed to his densest form in shock. "Is this some form of ritual self-harm? A punishment for breaking the container?" Morgan let out a short laugh that sounded half-pained. "It's called disinfecting. The alcohol kills bacteria that might have entered the wound." Taz felt his primary heart skip several beats. "You're deliberately causing yourself pain to kill microbes." "Well, yeah," Morgan replied, now applying an adhesive bandage to the wound with practiced efficiency. "That's pretty much standard human first aid. Cut yourself. Clean it with something that kills germs, cover it up. Basic stuff." The research team exchanged glances of pure disbelief. They had been studying human cleanliness behaviors for weeks, but nothing had prepared them for the sight of a human willingly applying caustic chemicals to an open wound. But the pain Taz managed, still struggling to process what he'd witnessed. Morgan shrugged, flexing their bandaged hand experimentally. "Stings for a few seconds. Better than infection." Better than Taz couldn't even finish the sentence. His entire understanding of human fragility had just been flipped upside down, inside out, and possibly thrown into an alternate dimension. Humans didn't just fear infection. They fought it with fire. The research team had relocated to the station's common area, a neutral territory where they could process the trauma they'd just witnessed. Taz's tendrils hadn't stopped twitching since the incident, and Kirada's skin had settled into an unsettled greenish yellow that made her look positively nauseous. "So let me get this straight," Taz said, trying to organize his thoughts. "You deliberately pour caustic chemicals onto open wounds as standard medical practice?" Morgan nodded casually, as if confirming something as mundane as the station's artificial gravity settings. "That's right. Alcohol, hydrogen peroxide, iodine, basically anything that kills microorganisms." "But these substances," Vox interjected, mandibles clicking in agitation, "they damage your own cellular structures as well, correct? We all saw your pain response." "Well, yeah, they're not super selective. They kill bacteria and irritate my cells too. That's why it stings." Morgan shrugged as if this were the most normal thing in the universe. "But my cells can recover. The bacteria can't if they're dead." Taz felt like his brain was short-circuiting. His entire conception of humans as fragile, infection-fearing creatures was being simultaneously confirmed and completely upended. "You're telling me," Taz began slowly, "that humans knowingly damage their own tissues as a preventative measure?" "Now you're getting it." Morgan smiled brightly. "It's a calculated trade-off. Minor temporary pain versus potential infection." "But that's Taz struggled to find the right word." "Barbaric?" offered Kirada. "Masochistic?" suggested Vox. "Completely insane?" Plythe's gaseous form swirled in what could only be described as existential confusion. I was going to say hardcore, Taz finished, using a human slang term he'd picked up. Morgan laughed. Look, our immune systems are actually pretty robust, all things considered. We've evolved alongside our microbes for millions of years. It's a constant arms race. They develop new ways to invade, we develop new ways to fight back. But the pain, Kirata insisted, her bioluminescence flickering with empathetic distress. You willingly subject yourself to it. Pain is just information, Morgan responded with that uncanny human casualness about suffering. It tells us something's wrong. We learn to contextualize it. Taz was about to inquire further when Morgan reached into their bag and pulled out a cylindrical container. Speaking of which, I think this calls for a beer. The human twisted the top off the container, releasing a faint hissing sound, then raised it to their lips and took a long drink. All four aliens froze in stunned silence. It was Vox who finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Are you drinking alcohol? Morgan paused mid-sip. Oh yeah. Want one? I've got another in my bag. The same substance you just poured on your wound? Taz couldn't control his volume, causing several other species in the common area to turn and stare. Well, not exactly the same, Morgan clarified, examining the container label. But this is ethanol-based, about 5%. Medical alcohol is usually isopropyl or ethanol at 70% or higher. You definitely don't want to drink the medical stuff. Plythe's gaseous form expanded and contracted rapidly, the Erosian equivalent of hyperventilating. You put it on wounds but also in your digestive tract? Deliberately? For different purposes. Sure, Morgan took another casual sip. This is for recreation. The other is for disinfection. Taz felt like reality itself was starting to unravel. You use the same class of chemical to both sterilize injuries and for enjoyment. Don't forget that we also use it for social lubrication and stress relief, Morgan added helpfully. Kirata's skin had shifted to a bewildered purple. Social lubrication? It helps us relax in social settings, lowers inhibitions. Vox's mandibles were clicking so rapidly they created an almost musical rhythm. So you consume a toxic substance that damages your neural functioning on purpose to improve social interactions? Pretty much, Morgan confirmed, though too much definitely has diminishing returns. And this recreational toxin, Taz ventured, trying to make sense of this new madness, is chemically related to what you pour on wounds to cause pain while killing microbes. Now you're getting it. Morgan raised the beer in a toast-like gesture. Humans and alcohol a complicated relationship. Taz's mind was reeling with contradictions. For weeks, they had observed Morgan's meticulous cleaning rituals, the careful hand-washing, the multiple daily showers, all pointing to a species terrified of microbial invasion. But now, faced with an actual wound, this supposedly fragile human had calmly inflicted chemical burns on themselves as a form of medicine, and was now drinking a similar chemical for fun. I think, Taz said slowly, we may need to completely reevaluate our understanding of human physiology and psychology. And pain tolerance, added Kirata. And what constitutes rational behavior, Plythe contributed. Morgan grinned over the rim of their beer. Humans are full of surprises. You should see what we do with capsaicin. What's capsaicin? Box asked cautiously. Oh, it's a chemical that causes intense burning sensations. We deliberately add it to food because we enjoy the pain. There was a moment of stunned silence before Taz finally responded. No, I refuse to believe that. Even humans can't be that. Ever heard of hot sauce? Morgan asked innocently. Taz buried his face in his tendrils and groaned. Humans weren't just microbe warriors. They were masochistic madness incarnate. Attention, research teams. Professor Navarox's gelatinous form pulsated at the front of the lecture hall, his core darkening with academic seriousness. Your midterm projects will focus on comparative xenobiology with an emphasis on immune response mechanisms across sentient species. Taz exchanged glances with his teammates. After the alcohol incident 3 days ago, they'd been discussing little else besides human immune responses and the apparently masochistic methods humans employed to support them. Each team will select a specific biological system or response and conduct detailed comparative analysis, the professor continued. Your findings will be presented to the entire Xenobiology department at the end of the term. As the professor distributed project parameters through the neural network, student teams began buzzing with discussion. Taz felt his primary heart quicken. This was the perfect opportunity to formally study what they'd witnessed with Morgan. "We should do wound treatment," he whispered to the group. "After what we saw with Morgan, I think there's significant research potential." Kirata's skin pulsed with agreement, shifting to an excited pink hue. The biological and psychological aspects would make for a comprehensive study. The contrast between human methods and those of other species could yield fascinating insights, Vox added, his mandibles clicking thoughtfully. Plytha's gaseous form swirled with academic enthusiasm. "We could monitor pain responses, tissue regeneration rates, and infection prevention efficacy across multiple species." "Are you all talking about my drinking habits or my wound cleaning?" Morgan asked, sliding into the seat beside them. "Your wound treatment," Taz clarified quickly, "though your recreational toxin consumption remains equally baffling." Morgan grinned. "So you want to study how different species handle boo-boos?" "Boo-boos?" Taz repeated, his translator failing to provide context. "Minor injuries," Morgan clarified. "And yes, I'm game if that's what you want to focus on. I volunteer as tribute." "As tribute?" This human continued to confuse Taz at every turn. "It means I'm willing to be your research subject. Just don't expect me to get injured on purpose. I draw the line at self-harm for science." The idea of deliberately causing harm had never crossed Taz's mind, and he felt his tendrils recoil in horror. "Of course not. We would never." "Relax. I'm joking," Morgan said, patting Taz's arm, a human gesture that still made him flinch slightly. "But we could set up a controlled demonstration. Small, sterile laceration, proper documentation, the works." "You'd allow that? For our research?" Kirata asked, her bioluminescence pulsing with surprise. "Sure. It's no big deal for me, and it sounds like you all could use the education." Morgan's tone carried that strange mix of humor and seriousness that Taz was still learning to decipher. As the class dispersed, the research team made their way to Professor Navarox to propose their project. The gelatinous academic's core brightened with interest as they outlined their plan. "Comparative wound treatment practices. Excellent choice," he burbled approvingly, "particularly with a human volunteer. Their methods are uniquely aggressive." "That's putting it mildly," Vox muttered, mandibles clicking softly. "You'll need the precision monitoring lab for this," the professor continued. "I'll authorize your team for access. Make sure you calibrate the pain response monitors correctly. Human nervous systems operate on different parameters than most species." 3 days later, Taz found himself standing in the precision monitoring lab, surrounded by more medical equipment than he'd ever seen assembled in one place. Screens displayed baseline readings for vital signs, neural activity, and microscopic tissue monitoring. "Are we really doing this?" he asked, adjusting the final neural scanner. "It seems excessive." Morgan sat calmly on the examination platform, already outfitted with various monitoring devices. "Come on, this is perfect. You get your data, I get to show off human toughness, and everyone learns something." Kirata was carefully arranging various disinfectants, alcohol, iodine solution, and something called hydrogen peroxide that Morgan had specifically requested. Each was more chemically aggressive than the last, in Taz's professional opinion. "I still don't understand why we need so many different tissue-damaging substances," Blythe commented, his gaseous form hovering anxiously near the monitoring station. "Different situations call for different solutions," Morgan explained. "Hydrogen peroxide is great for debris removal. It bubbles and physically pushes particles out of wounds. Alcohol kills pretty much everything but stings like crazy. Iodine works longer but stains." Fox, who was calibrating the microscopic tissue scanner, paused. "You have preferences about which chemical burns you apply to yourself?" "Doesn't everyone?" Morgan asked with seemingly genuine confusion. Taz sighed as he activated the final monitoring system. "No, Morgan. No other sentient species deliberately burns themselves with multiple chemical agents as standard medical practice." Your loss," Morgan replied, rolling up one sleeve. "So, are we doing this or what?" Taz took a deep breath, steadying his nerves. "As the primary researcher, I'll be documenting the procedure. Kirata will monitor physiological responses. Blythe will track microbial activity in real time. Orcs will handle tissue sample analysis. And I'll be the crazy human who pours burning chemicals on open wounds," Morgan added cheerfully. "Sounds like a perfect division of labor." Taz picked up his data tablet, trying to maintain scientific detachment. "For the record, I still think this is madness." Morgan winked another unsettling human gesture. "The best science usually is." "Recording initiated," Taz announced, his voice adopting the formal tone of scientific documentation. "Xenobiology Research Team Alpha, Experiment 47B, Comparative Analysis of Human Wound Treatment Methodology. Present our senior researchers Taz'Lur, Vox, Kirata, and Blythe, along with human subject Morgan Reeves." The precision monitoring lab hummed with technology. Holographic displays showed Morgan's vital signs: heart rate, blood pressure, neural activity, all currently within normal parameters for their species. Microscopic imaging systems were calibrated to capture cellular reactions in real time. Subject has consented to demonstrate standard human wound treatment procedures under controlled conditions, Taz continued. Monitoring systems are active and baseline readings have been established. Morgan sat calmly on the examination platform, sleeve rolled up to expose their forearm. Beside them lay an array of items that made Taz's tendrils curl involuntarily: a sterile scalpel, antiseptic wipes, and 3 different chemical agents in clearly labeled bottles. "Are you sure about this?" Taz asked, momentarily breaking protocol to check on Morgan once more. "Absolutely," Morgan replied with that unsettling human casualness. "This is barely even going to register on the pain scale. Trust me, I once stepped on a Lego brick. Now that was pain." Taz made a mental note to research these apparently weaponized Lego bricks at a later date. Proceeding with experiment, he said, returning to formal documentation. Subject will now create a controlled laceration using the provided sterile scalpel. The research team collectively held their breath, or in Blythe's case, condensed to their densest form as Morgan picked up the scalpel. With practiced precision that surprised Taz, Morgan created a small, shallow cut on their forearm, approximately 2 centimeters in length. "Laceration complete," Taz noted, watching as the monitoring systems registered the injury. Minor capillary damage observed. Pain response registering at level 2 on the human neural scale. "Barely feel it," Morgan commented, setting aside the scalpel. "Now comes the fun part. Subject will now demonstrate standard human disinfection procedures," Taz narrated, watching with a mixture of scientific curiosity and personal horror. Morgan reached for the first bottle, hydrogen peroxide, and unscrewed the cap. "Watch closely. This one's pretty cool." Before Taz could prepare himself, Morgan poured the clear liquid directly onto the open wound. The effect was immediate and alarming. The liquid began to foam and bubble violently on contact with the wound. stars above. Vox exclaimed, mandibles flaring wide. It's reacting with your tissues. Neural monitors registering spike in pain response, Kurata reported, her skin flashing a concerned orange, level 5 and climbing. Yeah, peroxide stings, Morgan acknowledged, their face showing only the slightest grimace. The bubbling is a catalytic reaction with an enzyme in the blood called catalase. The fizzing helps remove debris and kill some bacteria. But it's eating away at your flesh. His gaseous form swirled in distress. Not really. It's just oxidizing organic material. See? Already stopping. Morgan pointed to the wound, where indeed the bubbling was subsiding. Now for round 2. Taz could barely maintain his scientific composure as Morgan reached for the bottle of isopropyl alcohol. The subject is now applying a secondary disinfecting agent. The monitors spiked dramatically as Morgan poured alcohol over the same wound. This time, their facial expression showed clear discomfort, eyes narrowing, teeth briefly clenching. Pain response now at level 7, Kurata reported, her luminescence pulsing rapidly. Are you certain this is necessary? Pain is just information, Morgan replied through slightly gritted teeth. This stuff kills almost everything. Bacteria, viruses, fungal spores, they don't stand a chance. But neither do your own cells. Taz couldn't help objecting. The monitors show cellular disruption at the wound site. Surface cells only, Morgan explained, the pain already visibly subsiding. They'll regenerate. Meanwhile, any potential pathogens are neutralized. Fair trade. Your species evolved to accept this level of self-inflicted pain as normal medical treatment? Vox asked incredulously. Well, it beats the alternative, Morgan said, reaching for the final bottle of brown solution of iodine. In our evolutionary past, even minor wounds could become infected and kill you. A few seconds of pain is nothing compared to dying of sepsis. Taz watched in fascinated horror as Morgan applied the iodine, staining the skin around the wound a dark amber color. The monitors showed another spike in pain response, but lower than the alcohol had caused. This one's more of a slow burn, Morgan commented, seemingly analyzing their own pain with academic detachment. Iodine works longer than alcohol or peroxide, keeps killing microbes for hours. Subject demonstrates remarkable pain tolerance and analytical capacity during treatment, Taz noted in his recording, genuinely impressed despite his horror. Neural pathways appear to process pain differently than in most sentient species. It's not that we don't feel it, Morgan explained, watching as Kurata applied a bandage to the wound with nervous precision. We've just evolved to contextualize it. Pain with a purpose is different from pain without meaning. The monitoring equipment continued collecting data as the team observed the immediate effects of the treatments. Microscopic imaging showed dead microorganisms in and around the wound site, along with some damaged human cells that were already beginning to be replaced by the body's natural healing process. I think I'm beginning to understand, Taz said slowly, reviewing the real-time data. Humans don't fear infection. You've evolved to fight it aggressively, accepting temporary pain to prevent greater suffering. Exactly, Morgan exclaimed, looking genuinely pleased at Taz's insight. Our relationship with microbes isn't about fear, it's about respect and adaptation. We know they're trying to kill us, so we hit them first and hit them hard. But the cultural implications are fascinating, Kurata added, her skin now pulsing a thoughtful blue. Your species has normalized what most would consider self-torture as routine medical care. Morgan laughed. When you put it that way, it does sound pretty metal. Metal? Plytha's gaseous form swirled in confusion. Human expression. Means intense or hardcore, Morgan explained. Look, humans evolved on a planet teeming with things trying to kill us. We didn't become the dominant species by being gentle or avoiding pain. We got where we are by being stubborn, adaptable, and willing to suffer a little now to prevent suffering a lot later. Taz looked at the data again, seeing it with new eyes. The pain response had already decreased to baseline levels. The wound treatment had been swift, efficient, and effective, if brutal by the standards of most species. "Remarkable," he said, almost to himself. "Your entire medical philosophy is built on aggressive prevention rather than passive protection." "That's humanity in a nutshell," Morgan said, examining the bandage with casual interest. "Why avoid pain when you can use it? Why run from problems when you can burn them out instead?" In that moment, Taz realized he had completely misunderstood humans from the beginning. What he had interpreted as fear of infection was actually a warrior's respect for a worthy adversary. What seemed like neurotic cleanliness was strategic preemptive striking. Humans weren't fragile creatures living in fear of microscopic invaders. They were seasoned warriors who had been fighting an invisible war for their entire evolutionary history and winning. The Xenobiology department's main lecture hall was packed to capacity. Students and faculty from 17 different species had crammed into the space, many standing along the walls or hovering near the ceiling. The buzz of anticipation was palpable. "I've never seen this many people at a midterm presentation," Kirata whispered, her skin pulsing with nervous yellow light. "Word gets around when you're presenting research that challenges established xenobiological classification," Taz replied, arranging his data tablets for the 20th time. Their presentation, titled Pain as Prevention, Human Wound Care and Its Implications for Species Classification, had become something of a sensation after Professor Navarox had reviewed their preliminary findings. Morgan stood nearby, looking surprisingly comfortable despite being the center of attention. "Ready to revolutionize how the galaxy thinks about humans?" "That might be overstating it slightly," Taz said, though his tendrils curled with pride. Professor Navarox's gelatinous form glided to the center of the stage. "Attention, colleagues and students. Today's presentation represents a significant contribution to our understanding of human physiology and psychology. I present Research Team Alpha." As Taz took the podium, he felt a strange sensation, something like respect, when he looked at Morgan. It was a far cry from the vague disgust he'd felt when first meeting the human. "For generations," Taz began, "Galactic Xenobiology has classified humans as a fragile, infection-prone species whose elaborate cleanliness rituals stemmed from a profound fear of microbial invasion. Our research suggests this classification is fundamentally flawed." The holographic display activated, showing detailed scans of Morgan's wound treatment process. "Humans don't fear infection, they wage war against it. What we misinterpreted as neurotic cleaning behaviors are actually aggressive preventative strikes. What appeared to be fragility is, in fact, evolutionary adaptation to a hostile microbial environment." The audience watched in collective shock as the recording showed Morgan calmly applying various caustic substances to an open wound. "Most notably," Taz continued, "humans have evolved to contextualize pain when it serves a purpose. They willingly endure discomfort that would be considered torture by most sentient standards if it provides strategic advantage against infection." A Zentari professor in the front row's mandibles clicked rapidly in disbelief. "Are you suggesting we reclassify humans entirely?" "Indeed," Taz responded confidently. "Our data indicates humans should be recategorized from infection-susceptible cleaning-dependent mammals to aggressive microbial combat specialists." The presentation continued for nearly an hour, with Vox detailing cellular responses, Kirata explaining pain tolerance metrics, and implied the demonstrating the efficacy of the human treatments against various pathogens. When it concluded, the hall erupted in a cacophony of questions, exclamations, and sounds of disbelief, a different noise from each species present. Later, as the team celebrated in the common area, Taz found himself reflecting on how completely his perception had changed. "I can't believe I once thought you were fragile," he admitted to Morgan. "Your species is far more resilient than I ever imagined." Morgan shrugged. "Most species underestimate us." It's actually worked to our advantage historically." The conversation paused as Morgan suddenly winced, looking down at their finger. "What happened?" Kirata asked, her skin flashing concerned yellow. "Just a paper cut," Morgan replied, already reaching into their pocket. "Got anything sharp enough to break skin? These academic documents are vicious." Before anyone could respond, Morgan had produced a small alcohol wipe and was casually swabbing the tiny cut. "Oh no, not again," Vox groaned, turning several of his compound eyes away from the scene. Blythe's gaseous form retreated to the far side of the table. "Must you do that here? While we're eating?" "What?" Morgan looked genuinely confused at their reactions. "It's just a little alcohol. Barely stings." Taz watched his friend's dramatic reactions with newfound amusement. He'd come to understand something profound about humans. They weren't just survivors, they were conquerors. They didn't coexist with microscopic threats. They dominated them, accepting pain as simply another tool in their arsenal. "You know," Taz said, his tendrils curling in what humans might recognize as a smile, "for a species that burns themselves to health, you're surprisingly sane." Morgan grinned, applying an adhesive bandage to the paper cut with practiced efficiency. "That might be the nicest thing an alien has ever said to me." As his friends continued to react with exaggerated horror to Morgan's minor first aid, Taz realized he'd learned the most important lesson in xenobiology. Never judge a species by your own evolutionary standards. What looked like weakness could be strength. What appeared to be fear could be strategy. And sometimes the most formidable warriors in the galaxy were the ones who casually burnt their own wounds and then laughed about it over dinner. 6 months later, the medical wing of Helios Nexus had undergone some significant changes. Most notable among them was the newly established Department of Human-Inspired Medical Interventions, headed by none other than Dr. Taz'Lur himself. "You're absolutely certain you want to try this?" Taz asked, his tendrils gently waving as he held up a small bottle of diluted alcohol solution. "The sensation is unpleasant." The Lumidian patient on his examination table, not Kirata, but another member of her species with paler bioluminescence, pulsed with nervous determination. "If it works for humans, I want to try it. My light spots haven't responded to traditional Lumidian treatments." Taz nodded, his movements now carrying the confident precision he'd learned from months of studying human medical techniques. "Very well. I've adjusted the concentration for your physiology. It will sting, but significantly less than what humans typically endure." As he applied the solution to the affected areas, the Lumidian's skin flashed briefly in pain response before settling into a more natural rhythm. "Fascinating," remarked Professor Novorox, who was observing the procedure. "The mild cellular irritation appears to be stimulating the bioluminescent regeneration." "Exactly," Taz confirmed, applying a specialized bandage. "Sometimes a controlled external stress can activate healing mechanisms that wouldn't trigger otherwise. Humans discovered this principle millennia ago through trial and error." His office walls now displayed his various certifications, including his newly earned specialty in human medical adaptation techniques. Below them sat a framed copy of his now famous research paper, which had been distributed to medical academies throughout the Galactic Alliance. Later that day, as Taz was completing his treatment logs, his communication panel chimed with an incoming call. Morgan's face appeared on the screen, grinning widely. "Hey, Dr. Burns-a-lot. How's the practice going?" "That nickname is still not appreciated," Taz replied, though his tendrils curled in what Morgan now recognized as amusement. "But the treatments are showing remarkable efficacy across 7 different species. Your pain as medicine approach has applications we never imagined." "Told you we weren't crazy," Morgan said, their expression smug. "Any adverse reactions?" "Mostly psychological," Taz admitted. "Many patients can't believe we're intentionally causing discomfort as part of the healing process. The concept remains challenging for non-humans. They'll get used to it. Pain is just information, remember? So you keep saying, Taz replied dryly. Though I maintain that humans are the only known species in the galaxy to have evolved the peculiar strategy of burning themselves to health. Morgan laughed. We're efficient like that. Yeah. Why develop separate mechanisms for fighting infection when you can just set everything on fire and let your body sort it out? As they continued their conversation, Taz reflected on how dramatically his understanding of humans had changed. What he once saw as fragility was actually resilience. What seemed like neurotic fear was strategic aggression. Humans didn't just survive in a hostile microbial environment, they dominated it, using pain itself as a weapon. You know, Morgan, Taz said as their call was ending, I've studied 17 sentient species and their medical practices, but humans remain uniquely baffling and impressive. You're the only ones crazy enough to think that the best response to potential harm is to cause a different kind of harm first. Thanks, I think. It was intended as a compliment, Taz assured them. In a universe of species that avoid pain at all costs, there's something remarkably adaptive about embracing it as a tool. After ending the call, Taz picked up a small bottle of alcohol on his desk, a gift from Morgan when he'd received his specialty certification. The label read simply, "When in doubt, burn it out." Congratulations, Dr. Taz'Lur. He shook his head, tendrils swaying gently. Humans. The only species in the known galaxy that looked at something trying to kill them and decided the best response was to set it on fire, starting with themselves. Madness? Perhaps. But Taz had to admit it worked.